Night falls differently over the upper Himalayas. In most mountain ranges, darkness slips gently across the ridgelines, settling like a soft blanket. But in this forgotten pocket of stone and wind, known only as the Whispering Valley, night arrives with weight. It presses against the cliffs, thickens the air, and swallows every sound before it has the chance to escape. Even the wind, usually sharp and untamed in these altitudes, moves here as if unsure of its own presence. The valley's name comes from a strange phenomenon. When fog begins to creep in from the northern pass, travelers report hearing faint murmurs almost like distant voices carried by shifting currents of cold air. Scientists call it acoustic distortion. Locals call it something else entirely, the valley that speaks when someone is lost. The people who live around these slopes tell stories passed down through generations. Stories of nights when the fog rolled in without warning and visibility dropped to less than an arm's length. Stories of shepherds separated from their herds, trekkers who strayed from the marked routes, and rangers who vanished for hours before reappearing with no memory of the terrain they had crossed. And then there are the stories that refuse to fade, the ones whispered around hearthfires, the ones Sherpas share only when the moon is new. Stories of wolves, not wolves that stalk prey through shadowed forests, not wolves that howl into the freezing wind, but wolves that appear silently out of the pale mist and walk ahead, slowly, deliberately, always keeping just enough distance to avoid being touched, yet never far enough to be lost from sight. Men and women claim these wolves, led them to safety, guiding them through ravines they couldn't see across ridgelines obscured by dense cloud, and toward paths that reconnected them with their group. But the strangest part isn't that the wolves appeared. It's that they appeared exactly when the humans were one wrong step away from danger, in a place where nature rarely bends to the needs of those who enter it. The Whispering Valley holds a question as cold as its midnight fog. What compels a predator to become a guide? PARTTSIGHT-FIRSTTSIGHTFOGWOLVESPHENOMENON. The first recorded encounter came from a solo trekker named Ravi Thapa, a seasoned mountain guide who knew the Himalayan contours better than most. He was crossing the eastern spur of the Whispering Valley when a sudden wall of fog descended, dense silver and unnaturally fast. Within seconds, the familiar trail beneath his boots vanished, replaced by shifting shadows and disorienting echoes. Ravi later described the moment as standing inside a cloud that had forgotten how to move. He tried retracing his steps, but every direction felt identical. The cold thickened, and the silence became absolute. No wind, no distant rockfall, not even the soft rustle of alpine shrub, just the low pressing hum of the valley closing in. Then somewhere ahead he saw it, a shape motionless at first, a faint outline, 4 legs high shoulders, a narrow muzzle pointed directly at him, the silhouette of a Himalayan wolf. But something was wrong. The wolf wasn't standing in a stalking posture. It wasn't tense or aggressive or ready to flee. It simply watched him as though it was waiting. Ravi took a cautious step backward. The wolf took a slow step forward. Not threatening, almost purposeful. Then it turned its head slightly, just enough for him to see the glint of its pale eyes through the fog before walking deeper into the mist. It didn't vanish. It didn't lunge. It simply moved at a steady pace, pausing every few meters as if ensuring he could still see it. Despite every instinct telling him not to follow a predator, Ravi felt something stronger, the realization that he no longer knew where the trail was. The wolf, however, seemed to know exactly where it wanted him to go. For nearly 20 minutes, it led him across ground he could barely discern around hidden fissures, away from steep drops along a subtle incline he never would have noticed. When the fog finally loosened and the outline of the main path reappeared, the wolf stopped. It looked back once, a brief, silent acknowledgement, and then it walked into the fading mist and disappeared. When rangers investigated the following morning, they found Ravi's footprints clearly marked in the damp soil. But the tracks of the wolf, the animal that supposedly walked ahead of him the entire way, were nowhere to be found. No prints, no drag mark, no signs of fur brushing against the vegetation, as though the creature had moved across the fog itself. Stories like Ravi's are rare in the world of wildlife reporting, but in the Whispering Valley they are only the beginning. Would you like me to continue with PHN3 behavior that breaks? PART3BEH AVIORTHATBREAKS. Across the Himalayas, wolves are known for their caution. They avoid human settlements, keep their distance from trekking routes, and rarely linger long enough to be seen. They hunt in coordinated packs, move with efficiency, and trust instinct over curiosity. Nothing in their documented behavior suggests an interest in human activity, let alone in guiding a lost traveler through treacherous terrain. Yet in the Whispering Valley, the rules seem to bend. Wildlife biologists, who first examined the reported encounters, were quick to dismiss them as misinterpretations. Stress, altitude sickness, visual illusions caused by dense fog, these explanations fit comfortably within the scientific framework. Wolves leading people to safety simply did not. But the pattern refused to disappear. Every sighting shared three constants. The wolf appeared only when visibility dropped to near zero. It maintained a precise distance, never approaching too closely. And it moved with an uncanny sense of direction, always toward safer ground. This behavior contradicts everything known about Himalayan wolves. For predators that rely heavily on sight and smell, fog is a disadvantage. It muffles sound, scatters scent, and disrupts depth perception. A wolf entering dense fog voluntarily would be relinquishing its greatest survival tool. And yet here they were doing exactly that. What troubled researchers most wasn't the guidance itself, but the timing. Wolves in this valley did not appear to random hikers or groups. Reports consistently involved people on the brink of stepping into ravines, losing their path along fractured ridgelines, or unknowingly drifting toward avalanche-prone slope. It was as if the wolves recognized danger before the humans did. Tracking experts attempted to follow the supposed trails these wolves took, hoping to find patterns, territorial boundaries, prey migration routes, or safety corridors carved naturally by the landscape. But no matter how carefully they surveyed the terrain, the paths led nowhere. The wolves left no trace. In soil that preserved even the imprint of a small hoof, their absence was unnerving. Some researchers proposed a simpler explanation: coincidence. Lost travelers might instinctively move towards safer ground, and wolves, being cautious, might simply appear along those routes while moving away from the fog. A natural convergence of paths, nothing more. But this hypothesis unraveled quickly. In several documented cases, travelers were heading in the wrong direction entirely before the wolf appeared. The animal did not cross their path by accident, it redirected them. The deeper the investigators looked, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. In this valley, wolves behaved in ways no field guide, no ecological study, and no evolutionary model had ever predicted. What force, instinctive, environmental, or something older could be shaping their movements? That question would only grow more complicated as the stories stretched further into the valley's past and into its mythology. PART4 To understand why wolves in the Whispering Valley move with such deliberate precision, scientists began examining a part of their biology that had long been underestimated: their ability to navigate landscapes through cues invisible to human. Wolves do not rely solely on sight. In fact, vision is one of their less dominant senses. What they excel at far beyond most predators is interpreting the world through scent gradients, micro-air currents, and low-frequency vibrations traveling through the ground. In normal conditions, these sensory skills keep a wolf pack synchronized during long-distance hunts. But in a place like the Whispering Valley, where fog thickens the air, dampens sound, and obscures everything beyond a few steps, those abilities transform into something far more crucial: a natural compass. Studies of Himalayan wolves in neighboring regions show they can detect subtle shifts in wind direction and pressure changes caused by cliff edges, gorges, and open plains. Their paws are sensitive to small variations in ground texture, allowing them to sense unstable soil or fractured rock beneath layers of snow. Even their ears, attuned to frequencies far below human hearing, can pick up distant avalanches, deep water flows, or the echo of a narrow path. For humans navigating blind through fog, the world becomes a gray void. For a wolf, the valley remains full of invisible markers. This raised an intriguing possibility, one that some biologists hesitated to voice: wolves might not be guiding people intentionally. They could simply be following the safest, most stable pathway they instinctively recognize, and humans are interpreting it as guidance. But this theory didn't answer the most haunting detail of the sightings. Why did wolves appear only when a human had already strayed dangerously off course? Local rangers noted something scientists had overlooked. In the Whispering Valley, temperature changes cause sudden fog banks to form around hazardous terrain, ravines, unstable slopes, and narrow ridges. Wolves, with their heightened senses, may perceive these danger zones long before the fog fully formed. When they detect a human entering such an area, the animal's natural avoidance behavior might bring them onto the same path. In other words, the wolves could be trying to avoid danger themselves, and humans simply follow them out. It is a clean, logical explanation. But even the scientists who proposed it admit it doesn't fully align with the accounts. Many travelers insist the wolf seemed to pause, turn its head, and wait, actions that feel intentional, not instinctive. Some describe the animals taking routes so precise and narrow that even experienced mountaineers would hesitate to walk them. And then there are the cases where wolves appeared before the fog even reached the human, almost anticipating the disorientation to come. Could their senses truly predict danger before it unfolded, or was something older, something deeper guiding their movement? The answers would lie not in science alone, but in the stories of the mountain clans who had lived beside these wolves long before the valley had a name. PART5THEMYTHSOFTHEMOUNTANC. Long before biologists arrived with satellite collars and tracking drones, the people of the high Himalayas had already given meaning to the wolves of the Whispering Valley. To them, these animals were not merely predators. They were beings woven into the fabric of the mountains themselves, guardians of pathways older than human memory. Among the clans living on the valley's outskirts, the wolves are known by an ancient name, Drukhari. Translated loosely, it means those who walk between worlds, not spirits, not animals, something in between. The title carries no fear, only respect. According to oral histories, Drukhari appear only in moments of uncertainty, when travelers lose their sense of direction, when fog erases the land, or when storms roll across the ridgelines like living walls. In these stories, the wolves do not speak, but their silence is described as a kind of guidance. Villagers recount instances where their elders followed a wolf's silhouette through falling snow, trusting it instinctively without understanding why. In the oldest mountain songs, the wolves are said to be keepers of the forgotten roots, protectors of those who enter lands where the mountains test a person's spirit more than their strength. One tale describes a hunter who survived an avalanche after following a lone wolf to a small cave moments before the ice collapsed behind him. Another speaks of a young girl who wandered into a fog bank and was led back by what she believed was the spirit of a lost family dog, only to learn no such animal had lived in her village. Yet not all myths paint these wolves as benevolent. Some warn that the Drukhari can mirror the fog, protective when respected, perilous when trespassed against. Travelers who speak too loudly in the valley or disturb resting sites are said to hear the whispers grow harsher, echoes twisting into warnings they cannot decipher. A few of the darker stories claim that the valley has two kinds of wolves, those who guide and those who mislead. Still, even within these contradictions, one theme remains constant: the wolves know the valley's secrets in ways humans never will. When modern researchers encountered the stories, they dismissed them as folklore, nothing more than superstition layered over natural behavior. But what puzzled them was how closely the legends mirrored real, documented encounters. The pauses, the glances over the shoulder, the ability to appear at the precise moment danger approached. And then there was the element science struggled most with: the wolves' seeming ability to navigate not just the land but the intent of the humans within it. To the clans, this wasn't supernatural. It was simply the valley expressing its will through the creatures that understood it best. The deeper investigators listened to these stories, the harder it became to separate myth from fact, and the rangers working closest to the wolves would soon provide accounts that blurred that line even further. PART6 RANGERS TESTIMONIES TRALSTE ATASHOULDNEXIST. For years, the rangers responsible for monitoring the Whispering Valley chose not to speak publicly about their encounters. Not because they feared ridicule, but because many of them believed the stories weren't theirs to tell. Only when the number of reports from trekkers increased did they begin to compare notes quietly during late-night shifts at the outpost near the southern ridge. What emerged was a pattern as unsettling as it was consistent. One of the earliest testimonies came from Ranger Nima Dorje, a veteran tracker who had spent 2 decades navigating the valley's labyrinth of ridges and hidden passes. During a winter patrol, he received a distress call from a small trekking team who had become separated in thick fog. By the time he reached their last known location, the visibility had dropped to almost nothing, just a pale, shifting curtain of white. Nima expected to find footprints, signs of panic, evidence of someone wandering in circles. Instead, he found a single trail of human steps, angling sharply away from the safe route, and beside them, faint impressions of something four-legged moving ahead. Not crossing, not diverging, leading. He followed the trail, expecting it to eventually veer toward the cliff edge, where many travelers make fatal mistake. Instead, it curved gently downward, weaving between boulders and shallow crevices before reconnecting with a stable switchback path. At the junction sat the missing trekker, cold, shaken but unharmed. The man insisted he hadn't known where he was going. He had simply followed the shadow of a wolf through the fog. But when Nima retraced the trail to confirm the story, the animal tracks were gone, not partially melted, not faint, completely gone, as if wiped clean from the earth. Other rangers reported similar experiences, a pair of silhouettes moving ahead of them during rescues. eye shine glowing dimly in the mist, always at the same height. Trails that began with human footprints and ended in places no wolf should logically choose. One ranger, Maya Sherpa, described a night when she and a colleague tracked a missing hiker for hours. Then, without explanation, a dark shape appeared ahead, motionless, waiting. When they approached, it disappeared into the fog. Moments later, they found the hiker crouched behind a rock ledge, disoriented but alive. The ledge sat on a narrow shelf of stable ground, one of the few safe spots in an otherwise deadly drop-off. "We didn't save him," Maya said later. "We just arrived where something else had already brought him." When rangers attempted to document these trails using GPS and thermal cameras, the recordings captured nothing unusual, just jagged topography and swirling fog. On foot, however, the same rangers swore the valley felt guided, as if the safest routes had been quietly carved out hours before they arrived. What troubled them most wasn't the sightings themselves. It was the sense of precision. These wolves, if wolves they truly were, did not behave like animals, randomly navigating harsh terrain. Their paths avoided unstable rock by inches, skirted avalanche channels perfectly, and intersected human movement with uncanny timing. Yet even the rangers with decades of field experience could not explain the strangest detail of all. The trails they followed were safer than any they had ever mapped, and none of them existed on official charts. As whispers of these encounters spread, investigators turned toward a different set of records, cases of missing travelers whose paths seemed to intersect with the wolves' unseen route. PART7THEMISSINGTRAEAEAEA. For all the stories of travelers guided to safety, the Whispering Valley carries another set of accounts, quiet, unsettling, and far less hopeful. These are the reports that rangers discuss only when the radios go silent and the firewood burns low. Case files of individuals who vanished into the fog and were later found in places that defied every pattern of human behavior. The first of these was a young mountaineer named Ankit Rao. He was experienced, disciplined, and familiar with the valley's terrain. When his group lost sight of him during a sudden fog surge, they assumed he had stopped to wait standard protocol. But when the mist thinned, he was gone. No calls were answered. No footprints lingered near the trail. A full search began at sunrise. After 8 hours, rangers located Ankit halfway down a narrow scree slope far from the marked route, seated upright, as though he had chosen the spot intentionally. He was alive, though barely conscious and hypothermic. When asked why he had wandered so far from the trail, he repeated the same phrase again and again. "I was following it." But when pressed, following what, his answer changed every time. "A wolf, a shadow, a shape ahead of me, something that knew the way." Yet the place he was found was not safe, not even close. One more step and he would have slipped into a ravine over 100 meters deep. This contradiction haunted the rescuers. Another case involved 2 shepherds who disappeared during a seasonal migration. Their bodies were later found near an old landslide path that no herder in the region would willingly approach. Their footprints suggested they had walked steadily, deliberately toward the hazardous incline, as if guided by an unseen presence. No struggle, no signs of panic, just a silent, unwavering path into danger. The most perplexing detail emerged when trackers examined the area beside the shepherd's footprints, were faint impressions of pores. Not erratic, not predatory, parallel, as though walking with them. But the tracks stopped abruptly, halfway down the slope, ending in clean soil where nothing could have erased them. Rangers tried to interpret the evidence logically. Some proposed disorientation caused by fog or panic, misinterpreted as purposeful movement. Others suggested the victims might have mistaken shadows or contours in the mist for a guiding presence. But the consistency among cases made coincidence increasingly difficult to defend. In nearly every file, victims reported seeing something moving ahead of them before they vanished from safe route. In nearly every file, paw-shaped traces appeared briefly and then disappeared in impossible places. In nearly every file, the direction of travel aligned with terrain wolves naturally avoid. These patterns raised a chilling possibility. If there are wolves that guide travelers out of danger, could there also be wolves, real or imagined, that lead them deeper into it? Or, as some Sherpas whisper, is the valley itself choosing whom to spare and whom to keep? As investigators wrestled with these questions, the boundaries between biology and myth began to blur. And the nature of the wolves' protectors, predators, or something in between would only grow more complex in the chapters that followed. P-A-R-T 8THEDUR. As the accounts accumulated, rescues on one side, unexplained disappearances on the other, the Whispering Valley presented a contradiction that neither scientists nor local communities could fully resolve. The wolves at the heart of the mystery seemed to embody two opposing instincts: guardianship and danger, protection and misdirection. And the more closely researchers examined the phenomenon, the more impossible it became to separate these roles into neat categories. To biologists, the simplest explanation remained rooted in instinct. Wolves, like many predators, avoid unstable terrain. Their uncanny ability to sense shifting rock-thin snow crusts or subtle changes in air pressure guides them away from hazards. If a lost human happened to follow a wolf retreating from danger, the result might appear intentional, even benevolent. A survival mechanism misread as compassion. But this theory faltered when confronted with case files where humans were found in perilous places wolves should naturally avoid. How could instinct explain tracks leading into narrow gullies, unstable slopes, or dormant avalanche channels? Why would a wolf, especially one navigating through blinding fog, move deeper into landscapes that offered no advantage and significant risk? Mountain elders offered a different perspective. To them, the valley's wolves reflect a dual spirit, responding not only to terrain, but to the intentions of those who enter their domain. Those who approach the land with reverence are led back. Those who move with arrogance, haste, or disrespect for the valley's rhythms are said to attract the other kind of guide shadows that mimic wolves, but carry no heartbeat, no warmth, and no loyalty. Rangers who straddle the worlds of science and tradition lean somewhere in between. Many believe the wolves are simply acting in ways humans don't yet understand, behaviors shaped by millennia of survival in one of the most unpredictable mountain corridors on Earth. A wolf guiding someone out of danger may be acting on instinct. A wolf leading someone astray may be misinterpreted entirely, a trick of fog and fear. Yet even the rangers whisper about nights when a wolf's silhouette looked too still, too quiet, too perfectly positioned, like a marker placed deliberately along a path. One ranger recalled a moment he still refuses to explain while tracking a missing shepherd. He saw two wolves standing side by side in the mist. One turned away, moving toward safer ground. The other remained motionless, staring directly at him. Moments later, it faded into the fog without making a sound. He followed the first wolf's path and survived. Had he chosen the second, he believed he would not have returned. This duality, real or imagined, has woven itself into every interpretation of the valley's wool. Are these creatures simply responding to sensory cues, or are humans imposing meaning where none exists? Are the benevolent encounters the anomaly or the sinister one? One thing is certain: whether the wolves guide, mislead, or merely exist, within a landscape far older and wiser than the people who traverse it. Their presence in the Whispering Valley challenges the boundaries between instinct and intention. And then came an unexpected experiment, one that shed new light on the mystery while deepening the shadows around it. When researchers finally attempted to study the phenomenon systematically, they approached the Whispering Valley with the precision of a scientific expedition: GPS mappers, environmental sensors, night vision cameras, and a small team of biologists trained to track Himalayan predators. Their goal was simple: observe the wolves' movement patterns during fog events and determine whether the guiding behavior had any measurable basis. But the valley had other plans. For 12 nights, nothing happened. Fog rolled in thick, swallowing entire ridgelines. Sensors captured shifts in air pressure. Cameras recorded the slow breathing of the landscape. But no wolves appeared, not a single silhouette, not a flash of eyeshine, not a single paw print crossing the soft frost-coated ground. Then, on the 13th night, the valley changed. A dense fog bank began sweeping in from the northern pass, lowering visibility to nearly zero. Two researchers positioned along parallel ridgelines simultaneously reported seeing a dark shape moving through the mist. Both described the same behavior: a steady gait, pauses every few meters, and an unbroken sense of direction, as if the animal knew exactly where the safest terrain lay. The team attempted to triangulate its movement using thermal cameras, but the cameras detected nothing. No heat signature, no mass large enough to be a wolf. The silhouette visible to the naked eye simply did not exist in infrared. When the fog lifted hours later, the researchers descended to inspect the ground. They found the tracks of the human patrol team clearly imprinted in the soft soil. But again, the wolf's tracks, the creature both observers insisted they saw, were absent. The trail ran clean and untouched, as though only one set of feet had passed through. It became the most perplexing data point of the entire project: a wolf seen by two people from different vantage points, but leaving no physical trace. The team debated possible explanations: mist-induced pareidolia, ambient distortion, shadow cast by shifting fog density. Even the suggestion, quietly reluctantly, that perhaps the valley itself was shaping illusions out of fear and expectation. Yet there was one final detail that none of them could ignore. Both observers, positioned nearly half a kilometer apart, reported the wolf turning its head at the exact same moment, as though acknowledging someone watching from afar. A synchronized gesture in perfect silence. After weeks of failed recordings, missing thermal signatures, and vanishing tracks, the team reached an uncomfortable conclusion: science could describe the valley, but not the wolf. The more tools they brought in, the less evidence the animals left behind. The more they tried to measure, the more the valley withdrew. In the end, what remained wasn't proof. It was presence. A presence that moved through fog without sound. A presence that guided some travelers and misled others. A presence that left nothing behind except stories too consistent to ignore, yet too intangible to capture. And perhaps that is the truth the Whispering Valley has guarded for generations: that not every mystery demands an answer, and not every creature moving through the night is meant to be understood. Some things in nature are not puzzles to be solved, but reminders, quiet, indifferent, and ancient, that the world remains wilder than we allow ourselves to believe.